Say not ye, there are yet 4 months, and then cometh the harvest? Behold, I say unto you, lift up your eyes, and look on the fields, for they are white already to harvest. Worldly goals have their reality in time. Spiritual goals have theirs in eternity. A farmer plants his seeds, day by day they grow. When the shoots appear above the ground, sunlight fills them with vitality. Months later, if the rains haven't failed, if the sun has shone regularly, and if the insects or disease haven't ruined the crop, the matured plants are harvested. Nothing can be done to speed up this process. The moon takes 4 weeks to make its orbit of the earth. The earth takes a year to complete its path around the sun. Even thus, everything on the material plane must await its fruition, according to the operation of natural law. Thus it happens that when a person comes onto the spiritual path, he may visualize his spiritual rewards as awaiting him after death, somewhere up in heaven. Here on earth, meanwhile, he works for enlightenment as he has always been accustomed to work, ever looking to the future for the results and never living fully here and now. Spiritual truths, however, are of a different order altogether. Their vistas embrace eternity. Their natural time frame is not the relativity of earth time, past, present, and future. Their realm is the eternal now. Paramhansa Yogananda once wrote that people require time to find God only because of their bondage to time consciousness. Otherwise, he said, God is with us always, never more so and never less so. It is we who hold him at a distance, both in time and in space. What we must do instead is to tell ourselves constantly, I have him now. Eternity is mine. Eternally, he is mine. The fields, Jesus said, are white already to harvest. He meant that God is ours even now, the eternal harvest ever ready for reaping. As Yogananda put it, God is just behind your feelings. He is just behind the very thoughts with which you pray. An important point to ponder in Jesus' words here is his command, lift up your eyes, that we might look on the fields. Modern translators have mistaken this clause for a mere figure of speech. They have changed it accordingly to correspond to what they believe to be its modern equivalent. Nothing, they've assumed, would be lost in the process, and perhaps a certain fluency would be gained. Thus, instead of lift up your eyes, their translations read, open your eyes, or even more simply, look around at the fields. How often have the scriptures suffered from being edited by learned men? These scholars, in their presumption, and because of their lack of spiritual awareness, have adjusted deep mystical teachings to human understanding. As it happens, a person's eyes become uplifted automatically during deep states of spiritual awareness. Thus have great saints been observed in ecstasy. Thus they have often been painted. In recent times, indeed, visionaries have on a number of occasions been photographed in a state of ecstasy, and the camera has shown their eyes turned not only upward, but too far upward, for their focus to be on anything outside themselves. The focus rather seems inward, as if at some point within their foreheads. In the teachings of yoga, there is a well-known tenet by which this position of the eyes is explained. Yogis, basing their teachings on meditative experience, teach that the seat of ecstasy and of spiritual vision is located in the forehead, at a point midway between the eyebrows. When a person's consciousness is in an uplifted state of spiritual awareness, the eyes become drawn forcibly upwards and locked in concentration at that point. Viewing Jesus' words from this Oriental standpoint, it is evident that his statement was no mere figure of speech. It was a mystical counsel. In fact, he was saying that to commune with God, one must lift up one's eyes and fix them at the seat of ecstasy between the eyebrows. Here, the meditating devotee should gaze steadfastly into the inner light. This light appears spontaneously once the mind becomes deeply calm. In contemplation of that white light within, the devotee should focus his attention on it wholeheartedly in the eternal now. In the verses that follow this passage, Jesus makes it clear that in God's realm, the principles of cause and effect do not apply as they do here on earth. Extending this thought into the sphere of religious attitudes, it should be clear that there is no need to dwell on thoughts of one's sinfulness or unworthiness. For divine grace is ours eternally, if we will but dwell in it with confidence in God's love for us. The Lord can liberate the soul from delusion in a trice. All that we, his children, need to do is wholeheartedly lift up the chalice of our devotion in deep prayer and inner communion to receive the influx of God's light. Thus, through the Holy Bible, God has spoken to mankind. And now a reading from the Gita. Krishna's words, holding the spine firm, the neck and head erect and motionless, let the yogi focus his eyes at the starting place of the nose, the point between the eyebrows. Let not his gaze roam elsewhere. Here we find specific instruction in the correct practice of meditation. Concentration at the point between the eyebrows is recommended in this passage as an aid to entering superconsciousness. For the point between the eyebrows is, yogis say, the seat of ecstasy in the body. Interestingly, this area of the brain, the frontal lobe, is also the most recently acquired evolutionally. It is the most advanced part of the brain. Note the difference between the human forehead and the forehead of lower animals. Man's rises vertically from the eyebrows, where the forehead of lower animals slopes sharply back. In the frontal lobe of our brain is centered the intellect, the principal faculty that separates mankind from lower animals. The intellect, too, however, is but a limited faculty compared to the direct perception of soul intuition. The intellect may be described as a halfway station on the soul's long evolutionary climb. It bestows on man the power to lift his consciousness out of the subconscious. It cannot, however, lift him higher still into soul consciousness. The point between the eyebrows represents the soul's doorway to the infinite. The mind, when deeply concentrated, beholds at that point a round light. This light is known in the yoga teachings as the spiritual eye. It is not a self-induced vision. Many people indeed, newcomers to the yoga teachings, exclaim with amazement that, although they've never heard of it before, they've sometimes seen this light during moments of deep inner calmness. The spiritual eye is as much a part of every human being as the brain. It is more a reality than the body parts, the loss or amputation of which cannot affect man essentially. The light of the spiritual eye can never be separated from our inner reality, for the simple reason that we are that reality. Even when we lose the body at death, we retain this inner light, for it is of the soul. Testimony regarding the inner light has indeed been gathered from hundreds of people who experienced temporary clinical death without losing consciousness. These experiences have been published in a number of books. Many of the people quoted found themselves standing or floating in the room outside their bodies. A high percentage of them reported receiving glimpses of a higher world. Interestingly, it made little difference to the quality of their experiences whether they were agnostics or believers. What did make a difference, evidently, was the manner in which they had so far lived their lives. Their experiences, it might be added, were not always pleasant or uplifting. These people's testimony often begins with an exclamation at the surprise they felt on finding themselves no longer in their physical bodies. Some of them described events which were later verified that had taken place. Some of them within, some of them actually outside the rooms in which their bodies were confined during their out-of-body experiences. Following their lack of initial shock on finding themselves incorporeal, many said they entered a long tunnel, at the end of which they beheld a brilliant light. Emerging from the tunnel into this light, they recognized it as a conscious entity whose role they intuitively understood was to judge them according to their actions on earth. All described this experience as the antithesis of judgmental, in the sense of harsh and unsympathetic. They described the light rather as kindly and accepting of them. Michelangelo's stern judge in the Sistine Chapel would seem, in the light of this experience, very far from the reality. On encountering the light, these people were sent back to earth. All of them were convinced that, had they entered into that light, they would have been unable to return here. Many regretted intensely that they couldn't stay there. Others expressed gratitude for the insight they'd been given into life's deeper purpose and meaning. Great masters of yoga have explained this experience in terms of their daily experience with the light. For in deep meditation, the soul merges into that light. The long tunnel, yogis explain, is the spine, through which the energy and consciousness must pass before one can leave the body by the doorway of the spiritual eye, whether temporarily, in ecstasy, or finally, in death. St. Paul described this experience also. "I assure you," he wrote, "by the certainty of Jesus Christ which we possess, I die daily." Deep meditation resembles the actual death experience with this important exception: one can return from meditation at will. In deep meditation, as also in death, the energy and consciousness rise through the spine, through the tunnel of the spine, and become centered in the brain. The unenlightened soul at death sinks back into a temporary sleep state, leaving the body by the little-known door through which it first entered physical consciousness, the medulla oblongata, which is located at the base of the brain. This medulla is the seat of the ego. Here the sperm and ovum unite to begin their creation of the physical body. Because the ego center is in the medulla, people of exaggerated ego consciousness focus their energy there naturally, often to the extent of producing tension at that point. Proud or conceited people can often be seen with their heads drawn back, as though looking down their noses at the world, during which time Swamiji would always go. Or else tossing their heads about in vigorous self-affirmation, as though unconsciously stimulated in the area of the medulla. The positive ego-free pole of this medullary center is situated at the point between the eyebrows. Yogis who at death are able to keep their minds focused in the spiritual eye soar through it and out into conscious freedom in the infinite. In ecstasy also, one's consciousness passes through this doorway into blissful union with God. Worldly people whose consciousness remains bound to earth sink backward passively into that light at death, as if in sleep, instead of soaring out into it through the spiritual eye. Retaining their ego identity, they subsequently experience as much of the astral world as their own inner clarity of consciousness permits. The after-death states to which they attain are not the same as superconscious freedom in God. These souls are assumed, rather, and without conscious will on their part, to whatever level of the astral regions they have merited by their deeds on earth. Earthbound souls must return eventually to the physical plane to continue their soul evolution in new bodies. Here they gradually refine their ego awareness in the process of shifting their polarity of self-identity from ego to soul consciousness, from the medulla, to speak in terms of spiritual anatomy, to the spiritual eye. Those who want to know God should follow in the footsteps of the masters. In ecstasy, one finds one's gaze drawn automatically upwards, his attention absorbed in concentration at the point between the eyebrows. Spiritual aspirants should concentrate their gaze and attention from the beginning at this point. Thus, they will hasten the coming of ecstasy's dawn. This practice will enable them to cooperate with the natural flow of divine grace. Gradually, with the increase of devotional magnetism, God's grace is attracted to descend into human consciousness. The soul, soaring upward on rays of heavenly grace, passes through the portals of the spiritual eye and out into the infinite freedom of spirit. Thus, through the Bhagavad Gita, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
I have to say this is one of my most favorite topics. And there are many reasons for that, although any other given week I might say the same of that as well. But today, this is my most favorite. I want to start with rereading the Living Wisely, Living Well quote. Moods, griefs, and sorrows of every kind cannot be reasoned away. They have their own reality and their own magnetic attraction. The only way to cure them is to change your level of awareness. Now, Swamiji picks his words very carefully, and they come from Master. He wrote, "The only way to cure them is to change your level of awareness." The only way to cure them is to change your level of awareness. When I was young, I used to drive moods and sorrows away by concentrating. Once I did so very fiercely at the point between the eyebrows, meaning when he was a kid, he discovered the teachings on his own that way. I just read yesterday in the news that neuroscientists have now discovered exactly what Yoganandaji said when Yogananda was talking about the grooves of the brain. You remember ever reading this? Master says that when we have negative habits or positive habits, they develop in our brain like grooves on a record. And I've mentioned this before because some people don't know what records are. But those of us above a certain age know what records are. And they've got the grooves around it that the needle reads as the record goes around. And so the more and more the needle goes around the record, the more and more that groove, Master was saying, on our brain gets, dug in. Neuroscientists now say, using thought, if we consciously don't follow that groove, that negative thought, and consciously develop new affirmations or positive, that the neuropeptides then dig in a new groove in the brain. So they've now seen this scientifically. Now, being a scientist of the past, I really don't care about this anymore. Because it makes sense intuitively, and Master said it, and it rings true. But many people need to hear that scientific fact. And isn't it interesting that science keeps finding scientific evidence of what Yoganandaji has said, in fact, of what yoga says. And so, just so fascinating, because here's Master saying the grooves in the brain, and here's the neuroscientist saying the grooves caused by neuropeptides in the brain. So amazing, but it makes a great point. If we can just shift our consciousness, We can be in this new state of mind. And when Swamiji says shift our consciousness, he means shift it upwards. And then we no longer have to be in those negative grooves that are in our brain. Now, with the eternal now, so often when we counsel people, people are very concerned about their meditations, whether it's going deeply. Sometimes people, when they talk about this incarnation, they'll say, oh, well, not me. I'm not going to find freedom in this incarnation. Why even talk about samadhi, because it doesn't really even count for me. We need to change our goals, our spiritual goals. This is serious stuff. Why counter the hope and the thought that we can gain freedom in this lifetime with a doubt? What's the purpose? Does it keep us feeling lower? Does it keep us feeling like, oh, we're no different than others? We need to develop these new goals and say to ourselves, why not? Why not? Master said we should all strive to be Jivan Muktas. Why not? Sure, let's go for it. There is no reason to have a doubt about that. Everybody in this room is serious about meditating, whether it's perfectly timed every day and the perfect amount or whatever, or not. Why not? We don't know what our true path is in this lifetime in terms of maybe we're not great at being regular right now, but maybe in 10 years we will be great at being regular. We don't know. We also don't know in our past lives how well we did before. There's no way to know. And by the restlessness we may have in our meditation now, we don't know if we have attained deep states of stillness in the past. And not only that, the restlessness we experience now is superficial. It has nothing to do with the true experience that we're having from meditation, only because our thoughts are so restless we can't perceive the depth. So why judge it? Why judge the depth if we can't perceive truly what that depth is? Why judge our spiritual advancement or whatever it is by how we perceive things? We don't know anything. We don't need to know anything. It's really in God's hands. And we truly can have that bliss now if we are so focused on unity and union with God. We'll counsel people and they'll be saying, oh, well, while I meditate, I'm constantly telling Master, okay, Master, bring me union, bring me union, bring me union. And it's full of so much tension. It's like, wait a minute. Is there only pleasure at the end of the trail, at the end of the rainbow? Is that the only place we get to have pleasure on the spiritual path? Is when we finally, hi Ravi, when we finally get there? Is that the only place we get to have that? No. It can be had now, and that's what Master is saying, and that is what Swamiji said every day. We can enjoy it. We can have bliss now. Can we only enjoy our meditation when we have perfect stillness that we perceive? No. We can have bliss and joy now, and I'm not talking theoretically. I'm not saying, oh, isn't this a nice mental concept? Let's all do it. Let's all try it. It is not a mental concept. This is truth and reality of who we are. We can feel that bliss now. It's possible. You can feel it in your body as a thrill, as Master says it. It is thrilling. In fact, it feels like, should I really be feeling this? This feels too good. Should I, do I, really? Is this what I should be feeling? It feels too good. It's like, wait a minute, I didn't achieve perfection yet. Why am I feeling that now? We can feel it now. We can relax into it. And then the other thing is, when we're having our meditation, we got to stop judging the meditation. Stop judging. Get the word restless out of your vocabulary. Get the word not deep enough out of your vocabulary. Get the words whatever, fill in the blank, out of your vocabulary, because frankly, who cares? How much does that judgment help you? And would you ever talk to a good friend that way? No. We want to talk to ourselves and to God as a deep, good friend. This is a cooperation with God that we have. And so we don't need to say, that was a restless meditation. We don't need to say, I didn't go very deep today. There's no need to. When you're in meditation and you're feeling that restlessness, you can just say, God, well, my heart's a little restless right now, because it's only the heart's restlessness that is making us feel this way. But I love you, and I know I'm touching you, and I'm asking that you touch me too. And so if it can only exist in prayer in our own minds, mental minds, as much as that matters, then do that, and then offer it up. Because it is a guarantee that the more we just keep sticking with it without judgment, the more I would say the faster it comes. And yet, as Master said, or Swamiji said in the reading, which I absolutely love, Master said, the only reason we don't find God now is because we have because of our own concept of time. Because we think step A, followed by step B, followed by step C, followed by step D, equals samadhi. And who cares about A, B, C, D? I only care about this end thing. And so that's just our own linear thoughts about how life should be or could be. But again, why not? And if you have a critical thought in your mind, just say to it, why not? And then change that groove. Sometimes it's helpful to have a little journal or a little affirmation. I remember once I went through a really, really hard Saturn time in my astrological chart. And I was so critical and negative constantly, and feeling other people were judging me all the time too. Just like kind of feeling tortured by thinking there were critical thoughts coming to me, and my thinking critical thoughts, it was just like, ugh. And so the only way I got out of it was I had like a weekly affirmation that I would just change each week. And every time my mind went there, I said, nope. And then I read my affirmation, and I dug new grooves, and it got me out of it. I felt as though during that time period I really mastered something, even though, of course, there's waves of that goes through life. So we're never like, I finally did it. I never will have negative thoughts again. And then, a week later, something new happens. But still, to go through that experience of having a strong energy in my life at that time, doing that, and then just having an affirmation, I watched how that worked and how it dug that new neuropeptide or that new groove on the record of the brain. And so we have so many wonderful techniques on this path, and that should give us hope. So when we say why not, say why not with hope, and positivity. And when we're going through difficult times, we always think, it's never going to change. This is how it's always going to be, right? I mean, this all the time. You go through a difficult, this is never going to change. But just why not? We go through these cycles. Rather than it's never going to change, say, Master, what lesson do you want me to learn? Because it's never going to change until we learn the lesson. So if we're open to the lesson that's trying to be learned, then suddenly everything can change. Even in that moment, as soon as we say, oh, this is a time I'm supposed to learn something, then we can look at it in a whole new way. Our record groove changes, and we say, oh, okay, what is the lesson now? And back to meditation and bliss and the spiritual eye. You know, this is the seat of ecstasy. Swamiji Master said that when we're walking around during the day, feel our focus here. When you're in bliss, there's incredible joy right here. It's hard to explain, but it's right here. And it's strange. But Master says, this is the seat of ecstasy. You will feel it strongly. And so, but there's not a when I feel it. There's a what do I do in the middle? What do I do in the middle? You know, there's that dark night of the soul that Krishna talks about with Arjuna when the wheel is stuck in the mud and he doesn't want to kill his relatives. And Arjuna is saying, you must kill your relatives because that's the way you're going to have freedom. And it's kind of like, oh, but I have such comfortable little thoughts in my head that I'm used to. And, oh, I'm so comfortable in my little habits that I'm used to. And Arjuna is saying, get rid of them, cut their heads off. But it is a dark night of the soul because Krishna is stuck. I mean, Arjuna, oh, I'm sorry, I was mixing the two up. Arjuna was stuck. And he was not feeling bliss yet, and yet couldn't go back to the world. And sometimes we find ourselves in that way, where we can't go back to the world because we try that stuff. You know, maybe you go out with your college mates or go to a function with your relatives, and it just doesn't feel like truth and satisfaction anymore. And then you meditate and all you can say is, my meditation was so difficult. And so we can get in those moods. But when we're in that space, ride it through. Even if it takes years, just ride it through, because it's really only what our mental perception is. It is not how our soul is actually perceiving it. That's why we have the chanting. That's why we have healing prayers. That's why we have service. That's why in our lives there's children and family that take care of still. That's why there's so much in life to take the focus off of me and what's not working for me, and to expand. In fact, if you find yourself in a very contractive space, find that one thing that makes you feel slightly more expanded. You know? It's always there. That we can feel so contracted and so in a horrible mood, and my life is so awful. And then one little thought, like, okay, I guess I'll read Living Wisely, Living Well today, And then we read it and we go, grooves on the brain? Huh. Okay, I'll contemplate that for a while. And then suddenly, where is that contraction and everything? It's gone. You see how just a little tiny thought towards the light just lifts us. And then we can continue with the momentum of that. Find another little piece of light. Find another little piece of light. And suddenly we're dug into it. We can't understand the true basis of our moods and the true basis of our unhappinesses because they are from so many, many lifetimes. You know, if we've had tons and tons of lifetimes during days of Brahma, then we've accumulated. And we just can't know where they came from. And so to think it out just doesn't work, meaning to logic it out, you know. Now, observation can be very helpful. You know, when I'm in this situation, I think this or feel that. When I'm in that situation, I think this or feel that. That can be good for problem solving, you know, where you notice how you are, as opposed to just being it. Right now, I am just feeling this way. Instead, we can broaden it a little bit by observing. I get triggered in this situation, I get triggered in that. And then we can see patterns in our life. I tend to get depressed every 6 months. You know, I mean, you can see patterns that happen. And it's helpful to have some sense of self-knowledge in that way. But it's even more motivation to find the new grooves to put into our minds. And then also that relationship with God, to make that relationship, in order to experience the eternal now, we have to have that intimate relationship with Divine Mother, that infinite relationship with God, with Master, with Swamiji. Again, that is not theoretical anyway. This was an interesting quote Swami wrote once. He said, "As long as you have the capacity to get angry, you'll think God is angry at you. As long as you have the capacity to judge, you'll think God is judging you." Isn't that interesting? So when we say God must not be very happy with me because, then we know, oh, I must still be judging. Or, you know, God's going to get me if I don't do this one specific thing. You know, superstition is based on thinking God will get angry and punish us. So it can be anything. It can be I didn't do my puja at the right time, or, you know, this person has 10 generations of bad karma. You know, a lot of things can be very superstitious, and we think that it's because God got angry at one point or is angry now and is punishing us. But as long as you have the capacity to get angry, you'll think God is angry at you. And so we need to know God is a reflection. When our relationship with God is a reflection of our consciousness. And here's another nice quote from Swamiji. Usually when people pray, they say, "Come to me, help me, take pity on me." Great inspiration and inner freedom, however, come when one can bring himself to think and pray, "In whatever way I visualize you, you are behind that, beyond that. I personally don't even exist. My own reality is infinite." The more you can direct your mental flow outward and upward, the more blissful you will become. That is to say, you'll become full of bliss. So, when we are in our small selves, we think we know it all. We think we know what life is about. We think we know that, okay, if I meditate for the next 10 years and I'm very rigid in the way that I practice my meditation, therefore I should get this amount of realization after 10 years. I've got that on my calendar of goals. But it doesn't work that way. It's not linear. And so we need to knock the linear stuff out. Again, the why not. The hope of maybe I don't understand it fully. Maybe there is a way that God knows that I don't know, but that I can say, yes, I want to know it that way. I'm going to end with a letter from Swamiji. I can't remember. This was towards the end of his life. Was this the one that was 1 month before he died, or what was the episode?
This was about a year or so before I was at that college, and a man stood up and asked that really, really long question and said, "Have you seen the God?"
Right. But he said he went through an episode. Do you remember what the episode was?
Oh, sorry.
The year before. Anyway, you might remember while I'm reading this. Okay, Swamiji refers to an episode, and I can't remember what. Maybe it was a small stroke or something.
Darkness?
Maybe it was a darkness.
Well, I
Okay, he doesn't talk about that. But, dear everyone, I will answer your letters individually as I can, but I wanted to send out this message to all of you first. It is the first email I have been able to write personally in over a week since my little episode.
Okay, yes, that was when he had sort of like a little stroke or something.
Yeah, he had some small strokes in his brain.
Oh no, that was
Was
when
it?
No, that's when he almost died because of the heart. His blood pressure dropped really low, and he had to go to the hospital, and he almost died.
Okay.
Yeah, that was in Pune.
This was an almost death situation in Pune. That's right, and they had to take him from the land, and he had to drive the, hour from the bumpy land, and yeah. Okay. Last evening, okay, today I will spend most of the day in the hospital. Miriam, my nurse, told me this morning, "Your blood sugar reading today is horrible. My weight is up quite a bit." And when he talks about his weight, he would tend to retain, he had edema, and that when you retain water and your heart's in bad condition, that's congenital heart failure. The news may not be great, but to me it doesn't really matter, though I am deeply grateful to all of you for your prayers. I have had many benefits from this episode, if I can call a whole week and more an episode. One of the dearest benefits for me has been that it has strengthened my ties with my own blood family. You all are very dear to me. I think his blood family finally got a hold of him. Another has been that it has deepened my own bliss level. Someone asked me during a question and answer session in Pune a couple of weeks ago, "Have you seen God?" I am always careful to be truthful, but a direct yes or no question like that isn't easy to answer off the bat, so to speak. I answered simply, "No," and then I added, "But I have seen him in you." That wasn't a bad answer, but it was certainly an inadequate one. Sometimes people have asked him that, and he said, "That's only my business." So he was in a different mood during this. That wasn't a bad answer, but it was certainly an inadequate one. Yet people have a right to know whether what I am teaching them is from intellectual belief or from personal experience. And I have a right to consider precious and personal my own relationship with God. The correct answer then, as I am prepared to give it now, is I have never been a visionary. No, I haven't seen him, but I can truthfully say that I have sipped from the little cup of his infinite waters of bliss, and sometimes the sweetness of that water is almost more than I can stand. It is only a cup. His ocean of bliss still awaits me. I know enough only to be able to say with utter certainty that nothing else exists in all creation that is even comparably worthwhile. God alone is what everyone is seeking, his bliss, and his bliss in motion, which is what I call his love. I had a dream some months ago, which I shared with some of you. Enemies of mine tried to burn me at the stake. As they tied me there, I thought, the pain will only be temporary. I am not this body. I have given it to him. Whatever God wants done with it is his affair. So I remained even-minded. My enemies then, as may happen in dreams, were seated nearby at a banquet table, feasting and laughing happily. I remained indifferent to my condition as the flames rose up around me. And then friends of mine were able to save me. I was grateful to them, but not especially relieved. Whatever God wanted for me, I was happy to accept. Meaning he was grateful to them, but he didn't feel like a big high and a big low about it. My guru once said to me, God won't come to you until the end of life. Death itself is the final sacrifice you have to pay. I have sometimes wondered whether he meant my life would end in martyrdom. Well, I have had my share of that already, so what else is new? Maybe martyrdom will come in the form of not being allowed to live long enough to see the fruits of my life's work spent in service to God. Maybe I'm to go now. I don't really care. It's not that I'm indifferent, rather. It's that I want only his will above all in everything. This novel, which I finished last night, may be the last book I need to write, though I could still complete Volume 2 of The Promise of Immortality. The novel was Love Perfected, Life Divine. Certainly it isn't that I want to die, but nor would I live, nor do I want not to die. We'll see what today brings. Augustia, that ancient prophecy reading, said I would live 5.5 more years and complete a few things, including 3 films I am involved in now. I appreciate your prayers and your love very much, and wherever I am, whether here or infinity, I pray for all of you. With deep love in him, Swami Kriyananda. So even a great soul who was free at the end of his life didn't experience God in the way one may stereotypically say it, because in reality we really just don't know how God is going to come to us. You know, you can read the scriptures, and many times people will say, oh, but I'm not feeling this in my meditation, and oh, but I'm not doing that. I don't see the spiritual eye. I don't hear, oh, my, all these things where they somehow get a really solid sense of what it means to experience God. And we need to just let go of those expectations and let go of what we think it should be. It's such a narrow way to look at the spiritual path. Instead, just lighten up. Just say, God, however you want to come to me today, let it be. And just let it be. And the more open and relaxed we are and less strained and worried we are, the more it will come in its way. And the more we open ourselves up to have that very personal connection with Master and Swamiji, very personal, like a conversation can happen. But it's only when the heart is very still that we hear the answer. So sometimes the conversation is one-sided, but it doesn't mean the answer hasn't come. So we can just keep putting one foot in front of the other, but expect joy, expect bliss, expect love, and say, I can attain freedom in this lifetime, why not? I can be a Jivan Mukta in this lifetime, why not? And just allow that to be. We're Kriya yogis. And we don't have to live in that narrow expectation. Allow the mind to free up. Allow it to think the endless possibilities. Allow it to soar in possibilities, in what might be, what could be. And you'll find by living in that state, you'll have many more creative ideas at work. You'll have many more successful relationships. Things will work much better if we just allow our minds to open up and not live in just our tiny little expectations. So let's get there together. God bless you.